thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. This is Chairperson Jeanette McClure, and I would like to call this regular meeting of the Revenue Enhancement Oversight Commission to order. City Clerk Parrington, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Coaglino.
Here.
Commissioner Skupinski.
Here. Sorry about that.
Vice Chair Hamari.
Here, sorry.
That's okay. Chair McClure.
Here. Thank you very much. Let the record reflect that all commissioners are here except for Chris Elwood. So anyway, and everyone's present through teleconferencing. And I would like to remind my fellow commissioners and staff to help reduce background noise. Please mute your phone and then remember to unmute it again unless you are speaking. So we'll move on to public comment. At this time, we'll hear public comment for items not on the agenda. Persons wishing to raise items at this time are generally referred to staff, and if action by the commission is necessary, may be scheduled for a future meeting. Anyone wishing to speak on items not on the agenda, please raise your virtual hand. Your name will be called. We will unmute your microphone and you will have 3 minutes to speak. City Clerk Parrington, do we have any public comment or anyone?
No, we do not.
Right, thank you very much. Move right along into the consideration of the minutes from the last meeting. I think those are included in the agenda packet. I don't have the page number in front of me, but if anyone has comments on the minutes before us, please unmute your microphone and identify yourself. Get the page number. We have any comments? It's on page 4. Nope. Okay. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
I can motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Thank
I'll
you.
second it.
Thank you. So we have a motion by Commissioner Skupinski, second by Commissioner Coaglino. Will the city clerk please call roll of the motion?
That motion was Vice Chair Hamari, correct?
No, Commissioner.
Oh, it's Skupinski. Okay. Commissioner Skupinski.
Yes.
Commissioner Coaglino.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hamari.
Yes.
Chair McClure.
Yes. All right. Well, seeing no objections, motion passed. All right. So we will move on into the business portion of the meeting, unless I missed something. No. Okay, Greg, I wasn't sure. So we will now move into the annual community report and citizens oversight meeting. Will Deputy City Manager Greg Herman please present the report?
Good evening. Thank you, Chair McClure, and good evening, commissioners. We're happy to be here this evening for both of the items tonight. And I should also mention that I'm joined by a number of different staff members who may come in and speak with different questions or comments as we move through the evening. And that's just reflective, I think, of all the different staff that are involved in the programs and services that are funded by the local revenue measure. In particular, this first item is to review the annual community report. And we'll go ahead and move into that item now. So next slide, please. So this item is related to the annual community report. It's for the 2019 fiscal year that ended in June of 2020. And the recommendation is to review and take public comment on that report. Just as a reminder with respect to the Commission's role for this item, it's codified in Chapter 3.15 of the Municipal Code, which includes several different community oversight and fiscal accountability provisions for the local revenue measure. One of those is that we produce an annual community report each year, and that is distributed to all households. We do that through utility bills, and that includes both folks who receive their bills electronically. It's attached as a PDF, and as a hard copy or report and brief for those folks who receive it through the mail. We completed that this month, and that report be reviewed at a public meeting, which is this evening. And so what I'd like to do now is just take some time actually to go over the report itself. But before I do that, I do want to acknowledge the work of Commissioners Skopinski and Elwood. Each of them served on the ad hoc subcommittee that was tasked with creating this year's report, and I think did an excellent job. And so we're grateful to their effort, and we'll make sure to let Commissioner Elwood know that when he's able to join us again. So thank you both. Really quickly, this is the cover page. It's got a great shot of the new playground equipment and shade structure at the Islay Hill Park, both of which were funded through the local revenue measure. The next page of the report is really about COVID-19 and the impacts. That's important because this report and this fiscal year does cover the time frame that we really saw the first financial impacts of the pandemic, in particular March through June of 2020, and consequently that revenues were lower than expected. To offset that, staff worked really closely with the REOC and the City Council to reduce and defer non-essential services and non-critical infrastructure projects while prioritizing essential services and emergency response capability, which were really made possible by the local revenue measure. It was incredibly important over this time period. Also, a quick plug for the photos, which I'll be doing along the way. This is a picture of our newly acquired MEOC open space that was acquired using local revenue measure dollars and actually is now open to the public. We're working on a virtual ribbon cutting now and actually working on some additional expansions to that open space also funded through local revenue measure dollars. The next page just provides some general information about the local revenue measure as a general purpose tax, a little bit of information about the REOC, and again features a photo of 2 of our downtown bike officers, both of which are funded through the local revenue measure. The next page of the report is important. It actually has the ballot measure language from what was the previous Measure G that was approved by voters in 2014. That ballot measure language was used to create the spending priorities that are outlined in the report that you see before this evening, and also a shot of some great upgrades to the therapy pool at the Slow Swim Center. The next page looks at the revenues over time for the local revenue measure. As previously mentioned, the decline for this current fiscal year that you see in this report was due to the pandemic. Still, though, the measure brought in 7.7 in local funding for local services and projects through that fiscal year, and that represented about 13% of the city's general fund for that year. And this is a photo of one of the 2 different ranger positions that are funded directly through the measure. The next page shows the budget, but organized into those spending priorities that were derived from the ballot measure language. And this shows the percent of spending with respect to those priorities and also the total dollars spent by those priorities. The largest expenditures fell in street paving and public safety, but it's also showing spending in all of the different priorities that were identified, showing that we had completed projects within all of those. A part of that includes a newly sealed and striped section of the Bob Jones Trail, which is featured in the photo on this page. The next page is a little bit more about the uses, but looking at it in a different way. So historically, local revenue measure funds have been budgeted for approximately 70% capital projects and 30% services. Our spending over the last year pretty much mirrored that. We had 68% that was spent on capital projects and 32% on operating, and also a shot of some storm drain improvements that we were able to make last year on Bullock Lane. Wrapping things up towards the end of the report, we have a project spotlight, which we do every year. This year, the project spotlight was on the South Broad Street improvements, and that included the removal of some failing asphalt that we had in that area, replacement with new asphalt, and also including new curb ramps and substantial striping changes, which were big improvements for bicycle safety, and that includes some of the buffered bicycle lanes that you see here. And last but not least is a look at some of the projects that are underway for this current fiscal year. So we're currently in the 2021 fiscal year, and this shows a few of the things that we've already been able to complete and some of the things that are actually currently underway. We've completed the Marsh Street Bridge replacement. We've got pavement and pedestrian improvements coming. We've got the opening, as I mentioned, of the MEOC open space and the expansion of the Taft to Pepper section of the Railroad Safety Trail, which is actually currently under construction, and snuck in a picture of our new radio tower at South Hills, which is a big improvement for radio coverage for our public safety staff. And then the last half of the report really is just a series of tables. It lists all of the different projects and services that were identified for funding through the local revenue measure in with respect to the different priorities for which they're categorized. It shows each project and service line item, shows the amount budgeted, any amount spent, and then any amounts carrying forward over into the next fiscal year. And there's several of these pages in the report. So we'll just go ahead and skip ahead to the last part of the report, which is the back cover page, and just provide some final information about the Revenue Enhancement Oversight Commission, and then one last picture of that new playground and shade structure at the Islay Hill Park. And that is the presentation on the annual community report for the 1920 fiscal year for the local revenue measure, and we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Greg. Do we have any questions, any of the commissioners, or any public comment? No? Well, the report looks wonderful. Thank you. I know Chris isn't here, but thank you, Commissioner Skupinski, for putting this together. It looks wonderful. Guess if there's no public comment, no comment from commissioners, should move on. I don't want to make this anticlimactic, but
Oh, we did have someone who raised their hand. Just one moment. Okay. Gary Havis.
Unmute. Can you guys hear me now?
yes.
Hey, the infrastructure. This is Gary Havis. I'm here as Gary Havis. I'm also president of Bike Slow County, and I want to say that the bike infrastructure improvements are noticeable. Thank you very much. And as a citizen of the city of San Luis Obispo, I got my information on this report through the water bill. Or not, I don't know if it was water bill or whether it was another fashion, but it was kind of fun to see the same pictures and recognize the report and some of my favorite people from the Ranger Commission in there. So your work is noticeable, and thank you very much for your efforts on this.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that, Gary. I know staff does such a great job and the city does such a great job. So it's so nice to hear that people are noticing it.
Agreed. Thank you, Gary.
You guys are welcome. Cheers.
See, I needed that beer, guys. No, just kidding. All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And with that, I guess ended on a positive note. I think we can move on. Oh, yep. Commissioner Skupinski. Sorry.
Yeah, just a quick clarification. I was just trying to get a sense of the timeline that, the recommendation here is to review the report, but the report's already gone out. So is this a sort of a standard process, or are we late this year, or is this just how it works? How does that? I'm just trying to look for a little context in the scheduling.
Sure, happy to answer that question. Thanks for asking. So this is the standard process. So there's a couple of different things that we're required to do via the municipal code. The first thing is create the report and make sure that we distribute it to the community. And then secondarily is that after that report's been distributed, that we have an opportunity to review the report at a public meeting and take any public testimony with respect to it.
Great, thanks for that clarification.
No problem.
Public testimony and glowing feedback. I'd like the record to reflect. All right, well, thank you all very much. And we will now move on to the third item on our agenda, which is the proposed 2021 to 2023 local revenue measure expenditures.
Great, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I
I
apologize.
was going to say, so there's some items on this report that I have to recuse myself from. So you let me know when you want to do that. It's items 98, 22, and 23.
Thank you very much. I think we will have you listen to everything, and then after we're ready to discuss between the commissioners and with public comment, then we'll let you know when to leave the meeting.
Okay.
But right now we will have Greg go ahead and give the presentation. So would Deputy City Manager Greg Herman please present the report?
Absolutely. Thank you again. Happy to be here again. And we're really excited about the previous item, the annual community report, but we're probably like really excited about this item. It has been months and in some ways years in the making. It's a really big, significant milestone, not only in the budget process, but in terms of some of the projects and services that we're going to be speaking about this evening. I know you heard from me on the last item, and I'll be giving the presentation tonight. But again, we've got a whole group of staff members here that are available to answer questions about any of the different projects and services that I mentioned here. But there's lots of exciting information to go over. So I'm just going to go ahead and kick it off. So tonight's item is the proposed expenditures for the 21-23 financial plan for the local revenue measure. And you can go ahead and move. There we go. Thanks. So the recommendation tonight for this item, and this is an action item, so we'll need action by the commission on this item, is to recommend to the city council that the proposed uses of the local revenue measure funds are consistent with the approved priorities of the local revenue measure, which were discussed at your previous meeting. And just again, referencing back to the municipal code to understand the context and in particular, the role of the commission as it relates to this point in the process. It's really detailed and you can see it here on the screen, the direct text from the municipal code, but it really asks that the Revenue Enhancement Oversight Commission take into consideration all of the different points of input really over the last year and even prior to that, including the input that you heard at the community forum, the purpose of the measure, which we really have reflected in the priorities and are indicated by those, the major city goals, which are included in your report and we'll cover this evening, of the city council, and the amount of revenue available when making a recommendation to the city council on the proposed uses of these funds. And I think in particular, we've discussed this, is that what the REOC is being asked to do is to determine if those proposed expenditures are aligned with those approved priorities. And just going back to the previous meeting, those priorities are really a direct reflection of the ballot measure language that was approved by voters. And the ballot measure language is really based upon a lot of community feedback that we received on what the priorities are for our community and where folks would like to see additional investment by the city with respect to those. Those priorities were approved at the last Revenue Enhancement Oversight Commission meeting on February 18th. And just as a reminder for those, it's protect financial stability, community safety and emergency preparedness, creek and flood protection, addressing homelessness, safe and clean public areas, economic development and business retention, youth senior services and recreation facilities, street maintenance and transportation, which does include bicycle and pedestrian improvements, open space, natural areas, preservation and maintenance, and other services and projects. And we feel very confident that we've delivered a budget that lives up to these priorities and are excited to be able to go through all of those with you all. The next piece that was mentioned in the municipal code about context for this group in terms of making a recommendation to the city council are the major city goals. The council approved these major city goals on February 16th, and I want to go over the goals, but also the goal statements are included in your report. The first goal is economic recovery, resilience, and fiscal sustainability. The goal statement reads, in collaboration with local partners, continue to support economic recovery for all, economic recovery for all from the COVID-19 pandemic and support a thriving local economy by supporting local businesses, arts and culture, downtown vitality, practicing fiscal responsibility, paying down unfunded pension liabilities, and investing in critical infrastructure. For diversity, equity, and inclusion, the goal is to, in response to our commitment to making San Luis Obispo a more welcoming and inclusive city for all, continue to develop programs and policies to support diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and advance the recommendations of the DEI task force. For housing and homelessness, it's about expanding housing options for all, continuing to facilitate the production of housing, including the necessary supporting infrastructure, and an emphasis on affordable and workforce housing. In addition, it's got a focus of collaborating with local nonprofit partners, the county and state and federal governments to discover and implement comprehensive and effective strategies to reduce chronic homelessness. And then finally, for climate action, open space, and sustainable transportation, it's to proactively address the climate crisis, continue to update and implement the climate action plan for carbon neutrality, including preservation and enhancement of open space and urban forest, alternative and sustainable transportation, and planning and implementation for resilience. And so I think the goals, but also the goal statements are really important context. And I think you'll see those reflected in some of the budget items that you see put before you this evening. And then the very last piece mentioned for context for this group before making recommendations is, of course, thinking about the amount of money that we have available to allocate to all of these different services and projects. And so these are the current revenue projections that we've had. This is what we built the budget off of. They're approximately 24 million for the first year of the financial plan and 25 million for the second year. The way that we arrive at these forecasts is that we work with a company which supports cities up and down the state in terms of analyzing the regional but also local trends for spending and sales tax, and then we translate that into revenue forecasts. They do change over time, and we update the commission accordingly. I think it's also important to note that there is a substantial increase in revenues because this reflects the approved passage of Measure G20 from the last election, and this creates what becomes the largest revenue stream for the city. And it also means, especially with respect to capital improvement and infrastructure projects, that we're able to move forward with larger projects, both in terms of budget and scale, than we have done in the past, and also in terms of overall impact and benefit to the community. So we'll start at sort of a very high level with the budget and then break it down into its component pieces. And then also we were able to answer any questions about any individual line items that you've got in your packet as well. So historically, the local revenue measure funds, as you're aware, have been budgeted for about 70% capital and 30% services. We'd previously discussed with the commission a range of a split that was closer to 85% capital and 15% operating. Given the overall increase in revenues, though, with the passage of Measure G20, that would still allow for a really significant increase on the operating side and making sure that funding is available for key infrastructure projects. When we went, however, to build the budget for this year, you can see that ultimately we landed on a split that's closer to 75-25 for these 2-year period, and there's some really important reasons why that's the case. The first piece is that we recognize that there are some near-term investments related to economic recovery and some other emergent priorities that need to take place in order to fully support our community in terms of coming out of this pandemic. And so those are identified and funded through the local revenue measure. And then the second piece is that it's just going to take us time to ramp up our ability to deliver on that capital improvement program of the size and scale that we're able to, given the approval of Measure G20. One thing that I do want to note, though, and sort of the difference between the 15% that was identified and the 25% that you see reflected here is that the difference between those two we've identified as one-time funding. And so if you look at your chart in the attachment, it's shaded in gray. Those are one-time funding opportunities. This allows us to go back to that 85-15 if necessary, but in general just gives us the flexibility that we need to be able to reallocate funding as needed in the future. Also, just a quick housekeeping note, the totals are less than 100%, and that's just because not all of our dollars are budgeted down to the single final dollar, and that just gives us a little bit of added flexibility as we move through the year. So really excited to talk about what it is that we're actually doing. And the way that we arrived at this is that we basically took all of those different inputs, many of those that you've seen, every single project and service that you see identified, was reviewed by multiple different internal committees and staff that were many department heads that are on the call this evening, and staff really from all city departments because they all benefit from this funding source. Ultimately, each of those projects and services were recommended to the city manager for final recommendation to you all via the council, and that's what you have before this evening. It is significant. It's a list of 175 different items in 10 different categories. We will not go through all of them, but we'll certainly go over some highlights. This pie chart is just a look at the combined operating and capital expenditures for the first year only. And so you can see how those fall across the different spending priorities. And just as a reminder, that 35% on street maintenance and transportation, which includes bicycle and pedestrian improvements, that was combined as 2 different priorities. So in the previous local revenue measure report that you saw, those 2 different ones split apart. And now they're combined together, which is part of the reason why you see an increased amount of funding in that space. And so getting into some of the specifics of what we're able to do, and I really think the real story of what we're able to accomplish through the local revenue measure is less in the pie charts and more in terms of what we're actually going to be doing. And so I am really excited to just highlight a couple of those for you tonight. So just in year one, we're going to continue funding for downtown police officers and have funding for firefighters. We're going to make contributions that are going to allow the 40 Prado Homeless Services Center to expand bed capacity by 25%. We'll be the first city in the county to create a pilot mobile crisis unit that will address calls for services related to mental health without a uniformed officer. We'll double the size of our police department's community action team by adding an additional social worker. We'll have $500,000 to provide direct support to businesses just in that year to help them recover from the pandemic and grow stronger. We'll add a net new ranger position for protection of our open spaces. We'll have significant funding for open space fuel reduction, which will reduce the risk of wildfires to our communities. We'll have $500,000 over 2 years to help purchase new open space for our communities. We'll replace our 911 phone system. We'll make permanent the downtown zigzag lighting that we installed to help support businesses through the pandemic. We'll create new art installations in the downtown to support economic recovery. We're going to make major improvements to parks and playgrounds across the city, 7 different parks in the first year, including building a brand new park on North Broad. We'll install additional fencing on the railroad safety trail. We'll dredge Laguna Lake. We will maintain pedestrian bicycle pathways. We'll implement phase 2 of the Anholm Neighborhood Greenway Plan. We'll be redoing some of the streets in the outer downtown core area. And while we're doing that, making significant safety improvements for bicycles and pedestrians. Year 2, a similar breakdown. There's some variation just depending upon when projects fall in terms of the 2-year budget cycle, but you can kind of get a sense for what that looks like at a super high level. And I'm happy to highlight some of the individual things that you'll see happen in that second year as well. So highlights for year 2, and full disclosure, some of these start in year 1, but the list was already really long for year 1. And so I moved some of them into year 2. We're going to be able to replace critical equipment for our fire and police departments. We're going to be adding a new fire training safety captain to help keep us safe and prepared for emergencies. We're going to add net new additional resources to help remove trash and debris from parks, open space, and creeks. We're going to have funding to continue to provide for the lighting and activation downtown that we're able to do during the holidays. We have specific support program for arts and culture-based businesses and their recovery. We've got supplies and equipment for recreation facilities and programs, additional staffing resources for our youth service programs, critical replacement of our storm drain infrastructure, safety lighting for the Bob Jones Trail, a new restroom and kiosk cafe in Mission Plaza, traffic congestion relief and safety improvement projects, more playground equipment and construction of new parks, funding for the Prado Road Bridge and widening projects, maintenance of all of our traffic signals, maintenance of our urban forest and planting new trees, accessibility improvements and maintenance for our sidewalks, and installation of electric vehicle charging stations at city facilities. So again, there's 175 different items. This is really just a couple of the ones that I wanted to make sure that we focused in on tonight, this evening, for the benefit of the commission. I also wanted to just show a couple of other ways to look at the overall spending that we're proposing this evening. The first one is the combined capital uses over the 2 years. And so this is not operating just on the capital side and where that falls with respect to the different priorities that we have. You can see that a majority of that is in the street maintenance and transportation, which includes bike and pedestrian improvements. Part of that is that we took 2 priorities, combined them into 1. But the other aspect is that those projects are just the most expensive ones for us to build. And so they do require a lot of the funding that we're able to have. And then the second chart is on the operating side. And I think this gets into the story of some of the things I was mentioning. And so this is just on the operating side, taking out the capital piece. And I feel like this is where you're able to see some of those investments that we're talking about, especially as it relates to homeless services and economic development efforts reflected here. So that was a very quick tour and concludes our official presentation, but we would be happy to bring up the spreadsheet with all of the different projects and services identified and go through any of those in as much detail as the commission may wish.
Thank you very much. I think we can either take comments now if anyone has any general questions, or I think it would be helpful to go at least section by section so we can see what the line items are. If any of the commissioners have questions right off the bat, though. Yeah, let's go. Commissioner Skupinski.
Yeah, I look forward to looking at the spreadsheet a little bit more, but just conceptually, can you remind me, I think we talked about this maybe last meeting, at some point, that the advantages or the intentions of lumping the pedestrian and bike improvements in with the street paving and instead of having them they're separate objectives. Why did they get lumped? It's not so visible in terms of how they break out.
Sure. Thank you. Great question. I mean, I think one piece of it is just practically speaking, a lot of those projects go hand in hand. And so when we're doing major street reconstruction and resurfacing efforts are oftentimes the same time that we're implementing a lot of the different bicycle and pedestrian improvements that we have planned for our various projects. And so I think that's a big part of it. The other piece is just how the priorities flowed from the ballot measure language as it related to the previous ballot measure versus this one.
And Greg, I don't know if you want to I see Matt is one of our attendees, and if Teresa, if you want to promote him over to a panelist, maybe I'm sure he's got some more explanation. Both Matt and Brian Nelson are on the call today.
They should be right there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm here now. Thank you. I think Greg did an excellent job. It's really the implementation of both the street paving work and the bicycle and pedestrian improvements. They really go hand in hand. So on the pedestrian improvement side, when we pave a road, typically we need to get in there and replace the curb ramps as well. So that assists our pedestrian folks. With the restriping work, after we do our road, we typically focus in and making those improvements, additional striping, buffered bike lanes, parking, those type of improvements all together in one project. It's cost effective. The city gets the best bang for the dollars spent, and it's least impactful to the community to have all that work done in one time. So that's the rationale behind combining those things together.
And Commissioner Skupinski, I would say in the past, we would typically do road projects, and we really wouldn't take advantage of the opportunity to restripe and do pedestrian improvements. And so now when we look at our scope of work and we're looking at the specifications that we put out to bid, we now incorporate both ped and bike improvements that are based upon our updated standards. So it gets lumped into that. That's something different than you see from around the state. I mean, I think Commissioner Skupinski, if you're in and around the state, you'll see oftentimes road projects will pave right up to the edge of the bike path and leave the bike path unpaved, or none of the striping changed or modernized. And so this is a more comprehensive approach in terms of budgeting and making sure we're not missing anything.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarifications. That's really helpful, and it makes sense to me. I guess the trade-off is not being able to really highlight the distinction and the sort of the commitment and the investment that you're making to these bike infrastructure projects. But I suppose that I need to review the spreadsheet, but I'm sure it's all in the spreadsheet in more detail, as it's all public record. But that's my only comment, but I appreciate your responses.
Sure. And just one more piece to add. So it is definitely detailed in there, but there's other different ways that we look at the budget overall. And one of those is that via that major city goal, sustainability or sustainable transportation was a part of that. And so when you look at the major city goal work plan, which we're happy to forward to the commission as well, that's another way where you can look in particular at some of the bike and pedestrian improvements that are envisioned to help achieve the goal. And so that's maybe a more granular way to look at just those.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think unless there are other general questions, if everyone else is in agreement, maybe we can move through starting with protect financial stability. And I think everyone can see Greg's screen, but if anyone has any questions on items 1 through 6 on that subcategory, Okay, seeing no questions. Thank you. I'm not sure who has control of the screen right now. Is it Victoria? I think Victoria. All right, so moving on to community safety and emergency preparedness. I think at this time, let's go on items 7 through 21. And then we can have Commissioner Quaglino bounce out when we get to 22 and 23, I believe. Do we have any questions relating to any of the items on here? Nope, seeing none. Commissioner Quaglino, would you mind muting and turning off your screen briefly so we can discuss 23 and 22? Oops, my screen's going off. Yeah, but don't leave the meeting. There we go. Okay, perfect. Do any of the other commissioners have questions relating to item 22 or 23 on the budget? No. Okay, this is just such a great budget. Okay, Commissioner Quaglino, come back. Perfect. Easy. All right. Well, I guess we can, yeah, keep scrolling. I think these, at least to me, look pretty straightforward. So, okay, I think we can move on to, let's see, where are we now? 30 through 36, 21 through 36. Any questions? No? Okay, let's move on to creek and flood protection. I know we've all been able to take a look at this before, so if you're saving your comments for one later, just, yeah, hang tight. So on the creek and flood protection, any questions, comments? No? All right, I think that looks great. So moving on to addressing homelessness. I do have a question on this one, and it relates to the expansion of 40 Prado and the expansion of 25%. And I was wondering first if the facility was at capacity and if there was, you know, if that's where the 25% came from, or kind of how that 25% was determined, you know, kind of along those lines.
Sure, I can take a first shot at that, and Derek may have some additional information. But the first piece is that the facility has not been at full capacity, but at relatively close to capacity. So there have been beds available in that facility, but I think, you know, given some of the projections that we're seeing relative to homelessness as we recover from the pandemic, we think that there is likely going to be an increase or a potential increase with respect to homelessness. And we want to make sure that there is all the available capacity needed to be able to provide a safe place for people where they can be connected to resources. And the other piece is that when the facility was originally envisioned, there's the ability to expand within the existing footprint, but that's somewhat limited. And so I think the expansion within the existing footprint arrives at the 25% increase in capacity that we're able to take advantage of, and we're funding effectively the operating costs for CapSlow to be able to make that expansion and provide those services.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think the only additional information I'd provide is that, you know, one of the key aspects of the Boise case is that in order for us to take enforcement action relative to people sleeping in public places is that we have to have an available bed to put them in or send them to. And so when the facility is at full capacity, we don't have that option. And during COVID, we saw about 20 to 30 beds available night, and that was largely because individuals were resistant and concerned about living in a congregate living setting. Now that the pandemic is getting under control, disease transmission is getting under control, we're seeing the facility fill up on a regular basis. That combined with the fact that during the pandemic, 40 Prado did implement a policy that they were not admitting or allowing people that were who had come from outside the county within the last year. And so there's a lot of individuals that are unable, that we can't send to 40 Prado. So we need that additional capacity in order to for us to put people into the social services funnel. And I've had some conversations with the CAO, Wade Horton, and said, hey, this is a bridge and kind of a gap funding policy. The expectation is that the county will pick up these dollars over the long term, because ultimately it's your responsibility to provide these types of social services. I'll also share, we've been meeting with both Senator Laird and Cunningham and sharing just the dire need for this type of services, and shared with them that our community expressed this is one of our #1 priorities in our surveys and our community forum.
And so to kind of tack on to that, do you think that's enough? Is 25% additional? Will that be able to support us for a couple additional years, or what's the 5-year plan on that? Or I mean, I guess we're doing a 2-year strategy, but.
Great question, Commissioner McClure. That the answer is we don't know. What we do know is that the county's plan to end homelessness, their plan expired in 2018. It is a requirement by the federal government in order to receive federal dollars for homelessness. So we actually just met on Monday and been talking to the county about updating its plan in short order and to renew the strategy and focus. The focus of our region has been to try to get people into the Homeless Services Center, because we know that people's lives can't change if they're living on the streets, and we've got to get them into shelters. And so if it's not enough funding, we may come back mid-year. We may go to probably go to the county. The county is part of the American Rescue Plan. They got $55 million in direct funding and an additional $3.5 million for homeless services. So we've just began the conversation of how they're going to apply those dollars. And in my conversations with both Senator Laird and Assemblymember Cunningham, both committed to providing some additional direct funding from the state to counties, and perhaps in the first time in the history of the state of California, direct funding for homelessness to cities.
Excellent, thank you. Do any of the other commissioners have questions relating to addressing homelessness in our budget for the upcoming years? Yeah, Commissioner.
Yeah, quick question regarding line 46, no, 40, 45. Just in general, there's no capital dollars, it's all operating dollars, but that's a mobile crisis unit. What is the mobility equipment available for that support?
So I'll jump in really quick. So it is going to be we're looking at it as one contained program, and so there is I believe a van piece of it in there. So that is actually included in the 300,000 for the operating piece. So it will be an actual vehicle that a paramedic and a social worker will take to those calls for service.
We've got Chief Agson who can probably provide some more commentary on that.
Yeah, so we've modeled the program off the Oregon Cahoots program, and having the ability to affect those that are homeless that may be in crisis, where we would normally have law enforcement and fire response. So we're looking at getting a vehicle to be able to transport them, and more importantly, get them to the appropriate facility when they are experiencing some type of crisis where they need assistance.
So to be clear, Commissioner Kapinski, this is real new territory for the city of San Luis Obispo. We have never really provided this direct level social services. And here again, we've been clear with the county that this is a pilot program, and our intentions is that should the proof of concept work and reducing both the impacts and the numbers of homelessness in our community, that the county would step up and take over this program, and or we might find alternative funding sources. And Chief Agson and I have had some conversations about diverted or avoided costs by our hospitals as a result of not having our emergency rooms be essentially first line or medical treatment for homeless individuals. So we think that there's a lot of upside to this. I will share that many people believe that this will result in a one-to-one diversion of calls from our police department or our fire department. The data does not bear that out. What it actually shows is that there will actually be more calls for service when people realize that we have this service, and we'll still need both police and fire to respond to calls to make sure we're securing the scene and or addressing more complicated medical response issues.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, I think with no other questions on the topic of homelessness, I think we can move on to the safe and clean public areas, which probably has a little bit of overlap with homelessness as well. But do we have any questions from the commissioners on items 48 through 57?
I do, Commissioner McClure. I'm just curious, they've got $400,000 in capital improvements for downtown street bollards, and I'm sure they're necessary, but are those bollards to protect the parklets, or where are they going to be putting all these bollards downtown?
Matt, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I got it. So this project would fund mobile bollards. So basically, the thought process is that this equipment will be used and put out for farmers market to stop errant vehicles from coming into farmers market and hurting pedestrians. So they are mobile; they're not fixed, but they will decrease the likelihood of that event happening.
So this is just a little bit of additional background. This is in relation to some events, and gratefully they haven't happened so much over the last year. I think mostly related to the fact that there haven't been large gatherings of people, but that there have been incidents, some, relatively close to San Luis Obispo, where vehicles, intentionally or unintentionally ended up going through areas that had a high concentration of pedestrians. And so this is really a safety feature for our downtown to be able to protect against that, and with some flexibility for the different types of events that we host down there.
Any other questions, follow-ups? Looks like a large share of the money in this category is going to the Mission Plaza restroom replacement and a kiosk cafe, and then the Bob Jones solar lighting project. Any questions on that? Good.
So Commissioner McClure, just on 51, that's just, we're seeing just, if we're going to improve mobility and safe and clean, we know that many of our class 1 bike paths and surrounding the railroad safety trail and Bob Jones trail, we're just getting concerns about safety. And so we want to provide lighting, which, I always like to quote our friends in the police department, lighting is our friend. And so if it could help ways to illuminate the bike paths and help make sure that people make that so that these bike paths are accessible. And then we're really excited about the Mission Plaza concept plan and the replacing the bathrooms and the cafes. That bathroom's just undersized, not a good design, and will really help to be part of the overall plan to activate that space.
I think we might get there later, but I would like to follow up on the topic of streetlights and safety. I know we've talked for several years, I think probably every year since I've been on the commission, about adding some additional streetlights, both around, Cal Poly's campus and around downtown, to help facilitate people to be able to walk downtown and support the businesses. Has there been any discussion? I know, if I remember correctly, it was a very large project and it required significant infrastructure to add additional lights. But I'm wondering, has there been any progress on that, or where's the city in terms of adding some additional lights around the downtown core?
So I'll let Matt get in some more detail, and I am just trying to find it in the spreadsheet, but there is a specific line item, and I believe the funding amount is 75,000. And I
57.
promise, I'm sorry, thank you, Derek. And I promise my kid is fine in the background. Thank you. Line item number 57. So that in particular, and just to be more clear, that is for street lighting specifically, line item 57.
Right. How many lights can you do with 75,000? How many
Right.
are we talking?
Sure, yeah. So this is an ongoing program that we've had for several years, and we've been, putting in a moderate amount of streetlights each and every year. The cost varies depending upon location. So typically we've been focused more up and around the Cal Poly area, the older part of the city where street lighting did not go in as a standard. Really, we have three methods for installing street lights. The most cost-effective method is to install it on an existing utility pole. And so if there's an existing overhead wires up there and a wood pole that's up there, we can install a luminaire up there for around $2,500. That's a great cost savings. The second method that we have is installing a standard Cobra head street light. And depending upon the location and where the existing electrical infrastructure is, it ranges anywhere from $25,000 to $40,000 to install one pole. What we're leaning towards in the future is using more solar lighting. So the solar lighting right now, if we put motion detectors on it and limit the brightness of it, will last a large part of the nighttime, but the batteries aren't sufficient to illuminate very much and for very long. So it's an emerging technology that we're excited about. That range in cost for a standard pole and then a solar light's about $25,000. We're getting in about 6 street lights a year with this funding source.
Okay, thank you. So this 75,000, it looks like in each year, how many are you looking at doing, whatever 75,000 divided by 2,500? Are you looking at doing the littler ones, or are these actual, are you going to put in 2 streetlights?
It varies. Usually it's on a per request basis, or where staff notice that there's a lot of pedestrians and it's fairly dark at night. It typically averages about 6 a year, and it's a combination of standard street lights and then on wood poles as well. And we have one test case of a solar light that's been promising, and we hope to use those more in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners on safety? All right, I think we can move on to economic development and business retention. Okay, good, we're still good on that too. Do we have, I should say, what questions do we have on this?
I have a few. Actually, it's kind of the whole category, but there are items of business promotion and communication, which is 59, business retention, zoning regs, things like that. I'm just curious, maybe they could give an overview of how that money is going to be spent. And then a curious question is, I'm not really sure what zigzag lighting is. I'm just curious to know what zigzag lighting is. But I'm just curious, how is that we're going to be supporting the businesses downtown with these funds?
Sure, great question. Thank you very much. I can kind of go over things in general. So let me start with line 59, business promotions and communication support. So this is funds that we use to create effectively our shop local campaigns. And so when the pandemic first started, we have access to the email addresses for all the different businesses via their business license. And so we did surveys and we said, what are the things that we can do to help you? And somewhat surprisingly, one of the things that came in as the top piece was basically in-kind promotion. So businesses want wanted the city's assistance in promoting people to shop at their business or shop at local businesses in particular. And so you might have seen on social media as of late, there's some quick videos. We've got videos that are titled like shop like you mean it, or love slow like you mean it, and spend your dollars at local businesses. And so this is funding that goes to support communication and promotion efforts that highlight local businesses and encourage people to support those. Line 65 is business retention recovery programs. And this, I'm glad you asked, because this one, deserves a little bit more explanation, and it's TBD, for a reason. And that is that we, in the last year, and REOC has been really involved in this, we spent well over $1 million in direct business support programs. And so those were the buy local bonus program, the gift cards that we bought on behalf of businesses and encourage people to spend more dollars locally to receive additional gift cards. This is our business grant program. So the direct funding we gave to folks in $5,000 and $20,000 and $5,000, $1,000 increments to support them. And a number of other different programs. And so these are placeholder dollars that we have, and they're kind of stepped back over years 1 and 2 so that we can, eventually, hopefully get out of this business a little bit. But it is those direct funding support programs for businesses that we envision with respect to that. And then the other two, the zoning regulations update, we are seeing that the pandemic obviously accelerated a lot of trends that were already there, and they are happening faster. They're going to impact our downtown more quickly. And so we want to make sure there are things that are within the control of the city and things that may be outside of the control. One of the things that's within our control is what are our policies and our regulations relative to businesses and uses of spaces, and where are we potentially causing additional hurdles or unnecessary barriers to be able to take advantage of some of the trends that are occurring. And so this is for a look at our downtown uses and outdoor spaces in particular to see how we can better utilize those and see where our regulations can be modified to best take advantage of that. And the last piece, zigzag lighting. It goes by a lot of different names, and this seems to be the most popular, but it's the across the street bistro lighting that we installed during the holiday season. That's on Palm, Monterey, Higuera, and Marsh.
Okay, and then on the zoning regs, are they going to be looking at density, residential density downtown? That was in the upgrade a couple of years ago, and it got pulled off for environmental reasons.
Yeah, that's one of the areas, and Derek, feel free to jump in as well. But I think, we are abundantly clear on the city side of things that one of the keys to keeping downtown vibrant and active are going to be increasing the amount of residents that are living in the downtown. And so, there's a variety of different ways and levers that we can pull to be able to support that on the city side. Density is one of those, and I think is one of the things that'll certainly contemplated via the regulations. And then we see it sort of a self-perpetuating cycle. Once we have the residential development at scale, then we start to see more of the commercial services come in, and then it kind of perpetuates from there. The other piece that we're being mindful of in here is just the overall infrastructure piece of it. So outside of the specific residential and commercial development, how are we making sure that the infrastructure investments are occurring in downtown to make it attractive for both of those different types?
Thank you.
Do any of the other commissioners have any additional questions on this category? No. All right. Well, seeing none, moving on to youth and senior services and recreation facilities. This is a pretty long one, I think. Are we almost at 98? No, we're still good. Okay, so we'll go on this page, and then we'll have Commissioner Quaglino hop off a little bit later. But let's go through at least 73 through 91. If there's any questions? No? All right, let's move on down then to, let's go up to 97. So 92 to 97, Laguna Lake, parking lot maintenance, railroad safety. Nope. All right, seeing no questions. Oh, yep, Commissioner Skupinski.
Yeah, just line 96. Can can that be clarified, what that's about?
Sure. Matt, would you like to take this one?
Sure, yeah. So this is a fencing between the bike path and the railroad tracks. And basically we have an existing wire fence that doesn't do much to keep people from trespassing across UP's property. The intent is to replace that with more of it's basically like a peeler type of fencing that has wire in between it. It's more, you can see it on Foothill, California, that portion of the railroad safety trail. It's more robust and will usually keeps people from walking through that area. We found it to be a good combination between cost of installation and durability and aesthetically pleasing.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with no other questions, we will have Commissioner Quaglino leave for number 98, please. Perfect, thank you. Any questions from any of the commissioners on item 98? Roofing and solar? Nope. All right, seeing none, Commissioner Quaglino, come on back. And then we can move to the rest of the items, so 99 through 112. This reminds me, Victoria, did we have a breakdown on the total fleet replacement costs that were allocated? I think there was a couple different line items or included in a couple different categories.
Yeah, Matt, are you able to speak on that?
Absolutely. Yes, Victoria did a wonderful job of researching some of our past fleet purchases and providing me that information. So thank you so much, Victoria. So Victoria looked back from 2017 up through the 2023 fiscal year, and looking at the average fleet purchases during that time, it's about $750,000 across that span of 6 years. So you're seeing a larger investment in fleet through the 21-23 financial plan, and that is largely due to the reductions that we made in the 2021 budget supplement due to COVID. We did an initial reduction of about $450,000 in that year, and we went to a model of catastrophic failure. So we knew that we had some aging vehicles, and we knew that they could likely break, but we were waiting for them to actually fail at a point in time which would be cost efficient to replace them. So what you're seeing in this budget is we're trying to make up a little bit of ground on our fleet replacements. So that additional $450,000 in 21-22 and 22-23 to get us back up to current in a condition in which our fleet maintenance program can service and maintain those vehicles. Roughly, we're purchasing anywhere from anywhere from as low as 4 vehicles to as high as 19 vehicles and equipment. And so that's both vehicles, mowers, and generators, those types of equipment that our fleet maintenance services maintain.
Thank you. And I'm not sure where this question should be directed, but I also have a question on just a bit more information on the irrigation and drainage replacement, $650,000 for
Sure.
Sinsheimer.
Yeah, that's probably me as well. So that project, it's really basically 3 projects wrapped into one. And so the intent is to replace the irrigation system at Sinsheimer Stadium. That cost us around $100,000 to do that work. The other portion of the work is the drainage improvements, taking up surface water and getting it off the park, and that cost us around $300,000 for that work. The remaining cost for the project is largely due to the turf and the rock. So at Sinsheimer, the soil is very rocky, and so rocky soil is expensive to dig through. It takes more equipment and it costs a premium. And then by the time we get done with all of that work, we're going to need to do a serious turf rehabilitation. And that is largely why that project is in the $650,000 mark.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Skupinski.
Yeah, just on that topic, I don't know how it works. Does the stadium generate revenue for the city?
No. We provide that essentially rent-free to Blues. And just by way of background, that property is owned by the school district. We have a long-term lease on the property. So the lease basically provides that, we can do improvements with approval of the school district. If they ever want to convert it to school facilities, they have to pay us for the fair market value of the improvements. But bottom line, the investments we make in that facility are really a community amenity and give people access to minor league baseball and for other play that otherwise wouldn't be available.
Great question. Any other questions on in any of these categories? Nope. All right, I think we can move down to the largest portion of the budget, which is street maintenance and transportation. So I think, sorry, I'm scrolling along too. So we can probably start if anyone has any questions, either general or line item specific. Commissioner Skupinski.
Yeah, line 125. Can someone provide some color commentary for that?
So line 25 is the active transportation plan implementation. And so our active transportation commission and city council recently approved our active transportation plan. And the active transportation plan is really about providing mobility via bicycles and pedestrian traffic. So this funding here is to study and implement the tier 1 projects. The tier 1 projects in the active transportation plan are those projects what provide the most kind of community benefit for actually using bicycles as a trip replacement use. So we're focusing on the arterials, getting people around using bicycles and implementing those facilities.
And I'll just add too that this funding supports the paving projects. So the ATP elements that we implement for the paving projects, such as the bike median barriers for the outer downtown core occurring this summer, is funded by this portion of the ATP line item.
And that kind of goes together how we were discussing the blended street and bicycle improvements at the beginning part of the meeting, in which there's benefit to combining the street paving and the bicycle improvements all together to get the most cost effective implementation.
And Brian, Matt, what was that number? Do you recall what it was in pre-G20? I think it was it 75K? Was that the number that we had in the budget? I can't remember.
I think it ranged anywhere from $75,000 to $100,000, but yeah, for implementation.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that last piece. What was that referring to?
So just pre the increase in the sales tax revenue.
Oh, okay. That's nice.
Try to give it
Yeah, go ahead.
context.
Brian, you referenced did you say the painting? And you said this summer, was that this upcoming summer?
Yeah, so this upcoming summer, we're doing work in the outer downtown core, Marsh and Niagara. And part of that project will construct some bike median barriers. So protected bike facilities, essentially. And so this funding will go to support the construction of that component of the project. So it'll actually be concrete barriers separating the travel lanes from the bike lanes.
Yeah, super exciting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, one last question on that line. What is the code? What does the code in the last column refer to?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the bottom of each of the pages, there's a key for it. It's the major city
Oh.
goals. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Got it.
Yep, no problem.
So I have a couple questions. And actually it's great they brought up the major city goals. There's a lot of money being spent on paving. I think, what was it, 27% last year to 35% proposed in the next year, and then 41% in 2022, 2023. So it's a lot of money, particularly when public safety is, I mean, I understand the dollars are different, but public safety is going from 24% of the budget down to 14% of the budget. So it's, it's a big number. And it looks like there's several different large projects that the REOC is funding. One of them looks like the California Taft roundabout. I believe that is part of the railroad safety project, just based on geography, or no? That's completely different.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's completely different. It's a roadway intersection improvement on California Taft.
It's our number one, Commissioner McClure, I think it's our number one safety intersection, if I recall from the last traffic safety report, where we have a lot of ped bike collisions, and it will help with overall bike circulation and overall improvements. People are trying to make those left and right turns onto California, and the roundabout was identified as the best solution. It's expensive, but in the long term, it will ultimately save us money and reduce risk to the traveling public.
I wonder if that's something, would it make sense to put a major city goal next to some of those then? I don't think there was one next to it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a really helpful feedback, actually. I was speaking with a couple of other folks, and I think that is something, when we look to include this in the budget, I think we need to do another round of looking through that major city goal column. And I think that we absolutely did miss some things that can be tagged to a couple of the different major city goals. So agree, and yes, and I think this is one of those.
And that would be really helpful as well, particularly looking at how the percentages shake out. I mean, if it is, and it sounds like it is very much public safety, to be able to include that, at least, or at least highlight it. The other question I had was relating to the Prado Road interchange project and the amount of funds. So it's phase one or year one is the design, and then year two is the design, or how exactly is are the funds being allocated, and then what are we expecting going forward, and then how much is the project in total? What's REOC share of the project? What's the city's share of the project? Are there state and federal grants that the city is applying for? Just kind of a little bit more color on that project.
Sure. How about I'll start off and kind of give some updates on cost and all that. And maybe Brian, you can take over and kind of walk us through the delivery and implementation schedule for the interchange. So currently, the Prado Road interchange, the total cost of the interchange is estimated around $68 million. And so that's a combination of soft cost. And so that's, engineering, right-of-way acquisition, permitting, and also construction dollars for that. Of that, we have, I think it's $6.7 million estimated of local revenue measure dollars going into it. The interchange project is a combination of both city funds, private development funds, regional funds, county funds that are going into it to fund the final cost of it. And ultimately, it will likely have to be debt financed as well, pay over time for the use of that interchange as users use it. And then I guess the only other thing that I could add to that is it is a Caltrans oversight project. We're moving through the process as quickly as we possibly can to implement that project, but I think we're estimated starting the construction sometime in 2024. And Brian can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, that's right. And the first year, this 500,000 is to carry us through the project approval and environmental document stage. So that's still basically the study and planning stage, part of the Caltrans process. And what that involves is really looking at all the alternative designs for the interchange, whether it's a partial cloverleaf or a tight diamond. What does that intersection look like between Prado and the on and off ramps of the freeway there? Currently, we're looking very closely at the preferred alternative, which is basically minimizes the impacts to the adjacent courtyard, and the Elks Lane detour and the RTA facility there. Caltrans is eyeing that too as their preferred. They don't want to impact the city more than we would have to, because any other alternative is unlikely to actually get constructed. And so that process is going to take another 18 months or so. It's a time-consuming process, but it does involve a lot of reporting and studies through Caltrans and the environmental document phase, which after 18 months will lead into the full design. So at that point, we'll have a 30% project, and then we'll start doing an RFQ process to get a design consultant on board. So the 1.9 million in year 2 is really to kick off the full design phase. And the design of a $60 million project takes a couple of years at least to get through all of the other reviews and making sure we get right cost analysis completed, that our estimates are accurate, that the design doesn't have any flaws. So really making sure that the project is well thought out, well vetted before entering the construction phase in 2024.
One just final thing I'll add to is city staff are aggressively seeking outside funding sources to reduce the burden of this improvement on the community. So we have submitted several grant opportunities for the Prado interchange, and we've also are going to submit this project to the federal government for an earmark grant that in the Prado Road Creek Bridge as well, thinking that it might compete well for those federal dollars. So rest assured that we are working very hard to reduce the total cost to the city.
I would just add, Commissioner McClure, that this is the #1 project in our state transportation improvement plan. It's in our local regional transportation plan. It's the #1 priority project for our region. I've reached out to Congressman Carvajal's office, had some conversations about this. We'll be submitting this, as Mr. Horn just indicated, but it is a heavy lift. And I think people need to remember that absent this facility, our transportation network really starts to really see some impacts if we don't build it. It is the key linchpin in our entire network, and that's why we're putting a lot of assets towards it.
Appreciate the additional explanation on that, everyone. I think those are my main questions. Did anyone else have any questions? Definitely. Yeah.
So 139, the Anholm Neighborhood Greenway, I'm not familiar with that. And maybe someone could explain, what that entails and what the scope of the improvements that they're doing there.
Brian, would you mind taking that?
Yeah, so this is the connection from Foothill to Ramona. So we're on Foothill where that pedestrian hybrid beacon is. That's the beginning of the Anholm Greenway connection. So this will create the connection between Foothill and Ramona, and then from there, the permanent separated bike lane improvements from Ramona to downtown. So that actually include the concrete median barriers and protected class 4 bike facility to provide safe bikeway access into the downtown core. So there's a lot of elements of that. There's including some street improvements, so slurring the pavement out there, refreshing striping, and upgrading pedestrian facilities as well as kind of beautification measures along that corridor. So planter boxes, public art, and other elements to sort of enhance the look and feel of that corridor to make it an inviting route for bicyclists.
Okay, so these are additional bike lane improvements that were not included in the previous categories that we were talking about.
Correct. This is the separate independent project.
Okay.
And Commissioner Quaglino, I would just add, lighting to the underpass underneath Choro is a key piece. I think to Commissioner McClure, there probably needs to be something in that last column, perhaps a C or something else that speaks to this, because I think there's a lot of projects here that probably help support major city goals. So we'll take another look at that. In order just to be fully transparent, we do have a pending grant application for this project that we're fairly confident that will be funded. So we have hoped to have known by the end of this month. Today's the last day of the month. We thought we'd have clarity about it, but we're including it just in the event that it's not funded. If the grant is not funded, then we'll come back, or if it is funded, we'll come back to the REOC and propose some recommendations on how we use those funds.
Excellent, thank you. Do you have any other questions on the street paving? Yes, Commissioner Skibinski.
It's not on the list, but I'm just kind of curious how, 'cause I believe tank farm is a priority for the city, and I was just wondering if there's how that fits in this context or doesn't fit.
Maybe I can jump in, Matt. And so there's a lot of moving parts on tank farm. You may have seen the recent improvements in front of the subdivision, the commercial subdivision, where there was a lot of utility poles that were moved. There was some additional line widening. Just you got to remember the middle part of tank farm is actually not in the city. It's in the unincorporated area. All the way from what you get from out of United Rentals to where the Chevron property ends. That's still unincorporated area. And so we have been waiting for that property to be remediated. You may have seen some tractors out there for the last 4 years processing a remediation plan to clean up the oil that was spilled over 100 years ago. Once that remediation plan is done, and we have some assurances that we will not be annexing property that has continuing brownfield qualities, our plan is then to work with the new property owners to look at frontage improvements and widening. We do have a pending rezone application where you see the Hondas parked stored right there on Tank Farm. There's a proposed housing subdivision there. We're working with the property owners there on building their frontage improvements, including a roundabout and a realignment of Santa Fe. And so that will be developer funded, but there's a lot of moving pieces. And so we thought it was premature to put funding in that during this budget cycle. Wait to see when the tank farm property gets remediated, when we get some clarity about the housing project, what they'll be funding, and then look in and see what comes out from some infrastructure funding. You're hearing, President Biden talk about, perhaps $3 trillion. So we're trying to be very careful and selective about how we're moving things forward, but it's certainly in the top of our mind in terms of top priorities, in terms of cross-town connections.
Sure, and just to add a little bit onto that, inside this budget, there is funding that the city's putting forward as the city's share of improvements that developers are implementing at Tank Farm Santa Fe, and also a Class 1 path along Tank Farm Road as well. So there are improvements inside this budget for Tank Farm.
Oh, that's in where you said it's in the budget, the Class 1 pathway along
The city share of the Class 1 pathway. I can't remember if it is funded through the local revenue measure or general capital outlay, but inside the overall, the larger budget, it's funded.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions here? All right, I think we can move on to open space. Thank you very much, everyone, for entertaining the questions. Appreciate it. So open space and natural areas preservation and maintenance.
I have a question about Laguna Lake dredging. Is that really going to happen? That's
Gonna
great.
happen. Yeah, we're gonna advertise it in April.
So how much are they going to take out of that and where are they going to put it?
2,000 cubic yards, and they'll dry it in the adjacent park field, get it dry enough to then put it in a truck and haul it to Cold Canyon. So it's not going to stay on site. It's actually getting hauled off site.
So how deep is the plan? I mean, how deep will you go?
Oh, it's only a couple feet, but it's a wide area. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
When was the last time that was dredged?
Never.
Never. Yes.
It never has been.
And so just to remember that the reason we're getting the sediment is way back when and Commissioner Quaglino probably remembers all this. The reason we have the sediment problem is when they built some of those subdivisions, they redirected Perfumo Creek to go into the lake. And as a result, we get a lot of sedimentation. The Irish Hills are some of the largest producing sediments in terms of soil qualities. And so I think if I recall correctly, there's about 36,000, is that about right, cubic yards that need to be removed to fully restore the lake back to its historic level. So this is just the beginning. I think the total cost for dredging the entire lake was about 15 to 16 million bucks.
Yeah,
But this is untried technology in terms of using this system to dredge a lake, bag up the material, and then haul it over to Cold Canyon. You may be asking, well, why are we hauling it to Cold Canyon? Because believe it or not, the soil types that are out there require us to dispose of it in a landfill rather than hauling it to some other location. So that's why there's some complicated costs here.
And then what's the long-term plan for that? How often do you think it will need to be dredged going forward with Perfumo Creek kind of dumping sediment into there?
Well, the intent is to try to do two different things. Is with Perfumo Creek and the Perfumo Arm, when it rains, we have been over the last decade removing material while it's still in the creek before it gets to the lake to try to reduce the amount of sedimentation that actually fills into Laguna Lake. And as Derek mentioned, the full dredging project, I believe 5 years ago was about 15 million. So in today's dollars, that's what, 30. Things are getting more and more expensive. So what we've done is with this project, we've implemented what we're considering as a pilot project, something that we want to do periodically. So this will be the first time that we implement this. We want to learn from this project to see, how often we want to do it, what's the benefit to doing it, can we do it a different way and get a better benefit for the community. So really, we're learning what we want to do for a recurring maintenance program to maintain Laguna Lake.
But just as sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Hamari.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just just as a reminder, and you can look back at the annual community report from last year. We actually have done some of that sediment management work in the past. And so local revenue measure dollars, about $15,000 to $20,000 went to clearing out the creek previously, in addition to the dredging project contemplated here.
Yeah, it just seems like such a big long-term financial responsibility for the relatively small group of people that benefit from that lake.
That has been, I would say, Commissioner Hamari, some of the vaccine policy questions that have prevented us from moving forward. I think the council finally resolved to move forward. We explored, property based because there's a zone of benefit to the surrounding property owners. I don't think that that's totally off the table. I think right now we're going to see ultimately how this pilot program works. What do we learn from it? We should all expect that it's going to trash the park. And so the road is not in great condition, and the park's going to see some impact. So we're going to learn a lot from this pilot program and see where we go from there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions relating to open space, maintenance, preservation? No. All right, well then let's move right on down to, I believe, our last category, which is other. So if anyone has any questions on any of these. No, I guess it looks great. All right, well, I mean, no need to belabor the point then. I think the budget looks great. Everyone did a great job. Thank you so much for answering all of our questions. One last chance, any general questions, specific questions from any of the commissioners to staff?
Actually, I do have one more question on in the open space category on open space acquisition. I can't remember what was the amount of money that we spent in 2021 budget for that. Does anyone know off the top of their head?
I'll be able to find it relatively quickly, but we did increase the amount of money for open space acquisition in this financial plan. So I believe it was in the 100 to 150,000 range.
But I think, Greg, if I recall, we removed that funding as part of our COVID reduction strategy. Is my memory? I see Brian shaking.
Yeah, I think you're right. I believe we deferred that.
Yeah, so this restores it, Commissioner Hamari, to what it was historically at its highest amount when it was a major city goal. And because it is a major city goal or portion of major city goal, that's why you're seeing that level of funding. And just to refresh your memory, we typically leverage about anywhere from $3 to $6 outside dollar for every local dollar that we put in from outside granting agencies. So these local dollars go a long way to help us be competitive.
Okay, but you're saying that 250 was kind of historically what it's been in the past or close to it?
Yeah, at its highest point. Point.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you do a great job of leveraging those dollars too, because everyone knows how expensive land is in San Luis Obispo. So the fact that 250,000 can even go anywhere is kind of amazing. So excellent. All right. Well, City Clerk Parrington, do we have any public? Oh, did I miss something? No, I think we're done. Okay. Do we have any public comment on any of the items?
Yes. Gary Habas. Wait.
Hi. Back to number 96, back with Railroad Safety Trail fencing. Is there any coordination effort going on with the current study of the Lausanne Central Coast Layover Facility? I know that's going to be a while out, but I know they're probably also going to put more robust fencing for that facility. So that was one question. And the other one is for Mr. Horn. And I'm sorry, I didn't follow your conversation, but was there funding somehow for a class 1 path along Tank Farm from Broad to Higuera? If you could clarify that, that would be great. And thank you guys for all the work you're doing.
So as far as the coordination with Lausanne, no, we haven't coordinated with Lausanne. Really, that project is a much longer term project. And honestly, the fencing that we install right now will likely need to be replaced by the time that's actually implemented, would be my guess. As far as the class 1 path, did you say along Broad to Higuera?
Negative. We were talking about the development of Tank Farm and that property out there from Broad Street to Yes, it was Broad Street to Higuera. I misunderstood.
So that the funding I was mentioning was for a class 1 path from basically Tank Farm at Santa Fe to about nearly Higuera, to about where the city limit starts again. And so that is the city's fair share of a developer's project that they need to implement. And so that'll be implemented at the developer's time frame and as they go through the entitlement process. But the city's putting aside some money to be able to fund the city's fair share of that improvement.
Okay, that makes better sense. Yeah.
And that's 120,000 in year one. I was able to find that.
Okay, and so that is how does that relate then? I'm maybe taking up too much time and can cut me short, but how does that relate to the current funding years 21, 22, and 23, 22, 23 that we're talking about? Because that's not something that's going to be implemented in this budget cycle, is it?
The budget cycle that we're currently talking about is the 21 through 23 budget cycle. So that's fiscal year 21, 22. And then the second year is 22, 23. And so the funding would be secured in 22, 21, 22 to be able to offset the city's cost for the developer's implementation of that path.
So that's money that's going to be banked until that developer, whomever that happens to be, gets that project underway. Is that my understanding?
That is correct.
Okay, great, cool. Thank you very much for the clarification. I do appreciate it.
Not a problem.
And just to put some additional commentary on that, with respect to number 96, the railroad safety trail fencing, this is our good faith agreement with Union Pacific. If you recall, when we built the railroad safety trail from Orcutt all the way to the Jennifer Street Bridge, we had a soft commitment to maintain fencing, and part of our work to get the current round of construction that's happening over off of California, we made a commitment that once we were able to do so, that we would restore some of that safety fencing in and around the railroad safety trail from Orcutt all the way up to the Jennifer Street Bridge that's been compromised over time. And then I think to Mr. Havas, to your question about the timing of the Class 1 on Tank Farm, it'll be driven by development. And so there's an EIR underway for that housing project. But what Mr. Horn is referencing is the conditions and the environmental impacts that we're working through in the EIR for that project. And staff's just getting ahead and making some set aside for funding so that when they do come forward and pull the trigger on building that project, that we've got the city funds available.
Okay, good. I think I understand better than about how that goes. So that money the money is actual money for the construction of the trail, or money for the study of the construction of the trail? If you could clarify that one.
Construction.
Okay, good, cool. That's what I need to know. And again, I thank you very much for elaborating.
Thank you for joining.
Molly Kern.
Hello, Chair McLaren, Commissioners. This is Molly Kern. I'm speaking to you on behalf of the San Luis Obispo Chamber of Commerce. I just want to take a few very short minutes to reiterate our support for a few of the items that you're considering tonight. First is the funding dedicated to local business support and sort of the flexibility inherent in what you talked about a little bit earlier to craft the most beneficial programs as sort of reopening progresses, and what businesses need at any given time will progress and evolve as well. Second, I want to sort of shout out your team's approach to infrastructure maintenance. It is so important to make these investments early, as we know that it is the most cost-effective way to do maintenance as opposed to full recreation of roads as the wear and tear progresses. And also the approach of making changes like striping, paving, and bike improvements all in one go. Again, just really appreciate the cost-effective and coordinated approach. Finally, I'm going to share just a little bit of support for the investments that the city has made in downtown and proposes to continue and augment in the coming years through zoning updates, cultural activations, and additional parklets. Those have made so much difference for so many of our members in this past year. And I know that many of them have shared with us, and hopefully have shared with the city as well, how essential things like parklets and flexibility and the tenant improvement programs that you guys have done have been to their sort of survival over the past year. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your work and your service on this commission, citizen oversight and engagement of our sales tax dollars. It's so incredibly key to the ongoing fiscal health of our community. And we're grateful for your time, not tonight and on so many other evenings that you spend looking at this. So thank you.
Thank you.
That was our last speaker.
All right. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. I think at this point in time, I believe the item in front of us is to vote on whether or not to support the budget as presented.
And just as a reminder, Chair McClure will need two separate motions. One for projects 98, 22, and 23, as Commissioner Quaglino's conflicted out, and then a separate motion for the balance of the projects.
Okay, so let me figure out which one to do first. Let's do can we have a motion to approve the budget as presented without items 98, 23, and 22 at this time?
I'll make a motion to approve the budget as written, excluding 98, 22, and 23.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Hamari. Do I have a?
No.
Thank you very much. Seconded by Commissioner Quaglino. Can we have a roll call of this first motion, please?
Chair, I think Commissioner Quaglino made the motion, so we do still need a second.
I'll second it. It was Matt that did the motion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You just made me feel better for missing the first one.
Oh, I think I missed it. Anyway.
It's okay, no problem.
Right.
Commissioner Quaglino,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hamari,
Yes.
Commissioner Skupinski,
Yes.
Chair McClure.
Yes. All right. Motion passes on part A. So now can we recommend items 98, 23, and 22 to staff sans Mr. Quaglino? Do I have a motion to that?
Yeah, I'll
effect?
motion to approve the budget as presented, items 22, 23, and 98.
Thank you.
And
Can
Chair
I-
McClure, we do need to have Mr. Quaglino just turn off his video just so that it can show that he had no influence whatsoever. Thank you, Mr. Quaglino.
Excellent, thank you. And let's see, I'm trying to think. Do I have a second? Where is Commissioner Skupinski on my screen?
Right here.
Would you like to
Yes.
second?
I will second the motion.
Thank you. City Clerk Parrington, will you please call roll?
Vice Chair Hamari,
Yes.
Commissioner Skupinski,
Yes.
Chair McClure.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Sorry, that was a lot of people and trying to figure out who was going where. All right, so I think we are now done with item number 3 on our agenda, and we are moving on to our staff updates. So Deputy City Manager Greg Herman, will you please provide a staff update?
Thanks, Chair McClure. I actually don't have any additional updates other than to just give my thanks and gratitude to the variety of folks that you've heard from this evening, but also who you have not heard from, but were on deck and available to be able to answer questions. There's really a citywide benefit to the local revenue measure and the work that you all do, and a lot of effort went into tonight's presentation. And so my thanks to everybody for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Yeah, everyone did such a wonderful job. Kudos on presenting the budget. It looks great. Very, very happy. So thank you. Do we have any commissioner communication?
I'll just repeat that you got a great job in exciting times, and it's exciting times to for our commission too, to see such a vast and dramatic change, and you guys being able to reach a lot of your priorities going to have a big impact, and it all lines up, you know, for the voter language. And I think that was really good feedback, Commissioner McClure, regarding tagging the line items to really reinforce that. So I appreciate that comment, and otherwise, just a great job by everybody. I'm excited to be part of the process.
Excellent, thank you. All right, everyone. Well, Thank you all very much for your time on this beautiful Wednesday evening. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.